1950s nationally and in lacrosse were considered happy days. There was a feeling of safety and U.S. superiority. The U.S. economy was growing, and by the end of the decade, it had grown by 37%. We start to see the rise in the nuclear family, and the baby boom generation is born during this decade. This is also the atomic age of science and technology. The production and availability of consumer goods increased rapidly in this post-World War II era. Locally, in the fall of 1953, schools were in full swing for the beginning of the fall semester. La Crosse State College, as it was known then, experienced a huge growth period, adding faculty and staff, and many more students were enrolled, including veterans with young children who needed housing. This gave rise to public housing projects as well as the suburbs, and La Crosse began to grow south and east as it could to accommodate the baby boomers.
Football was a big part of school culture in the fall, both at the high school and college level. La Crosse State's homecoming football game, which is now UW-La Crosse, on Saturday, October 24, 1953, was a highly anticipated event with La Crosse versus River Falls. It seemed like most of the town was at the game. Many of the police were there trying to keep order, so that left many homes empty that evening, with the police attention focused on the college area. Viggo Rasmussen had, with his wife, recently built a new home in one of La Crosse's new developments on Hessler Drive on the south side. Rasmussen came to La Crosse in 1948 as a science professor who taught physics, math, and physical sciences. They needed a babysitter for the homecoming game, as their regular babysitter was also going to the game. The Rasmussens had two daughters, one old enough to go along to the game, the other 20 months old. So they called a recommended friend of their regular babysitter. The stand-in sitter happened to be the daughter of a colleague, Richard Hartley, who had joined the biology department faculty in 1950.
Evelyn Hartley was a 15-year-old sophomore at La Crosse Central High School. She was an honor student who participated in many extracurricular activities and was very good in science. In fact, she was elected as co-president of the Wisconsin Junior Academy of Science. She was a talented pianist, had a lovely singing voice, and was an accomplished actress, was an exceptional organizer and a leader in school and in her church youth group. Evelyn was a solid, sensible student who was motivated to do well in school. She was looking forward to a college degree in her future. She had lots of friends and stayed out of trouble. She was the all-American teenage girl from the wholesome Midwest.
At some point in the evening, Evelyn was supposed to have called her parents, Richard and Ethel. When Evelyn didn't call, her parents began to telephone the Rasmussen house repeatedly. With no answer from Evelyn, her father drove over to the Rasmussen house and found doors locked, lights on, music was playing on the radio. Walking around the house, he found a basement window screen out and the window unlocked. Evelyn's father entered through that window and found one of her shoes at the bottom of the stairs. In the living room, he found her other shoe and her glasses and what appeared to be signs of a struggle. The Rasmussen baby was sleeping peacefully in a nearby bedroom. Richard Hartley called the police from a neighbor's house across the street, and they started searching the area for clues. Clear, muddy shoe prints were found in the house. From the evidence in the house, it seemed likely that she had been abducted and carried out of the house through the basement window. On Sunday morning, in the light of day, a trail of blood was discovered that led through backyards with a couple different pools of blood on the ground and some blood stains on garages. This led to the initial assumption that Evelyn was injured in some way and carried away from the home. Pry marks were also discovered on the basement windows of several other homes in the neighborhood.
La Crosse awoke slowly to the news of the abduction. Many heard it first in church Sunday morning, as there was no Sunday newspaper. Soon, police on the radio asked the community to come together to help search for Evelyn. Because the police had no obvious motive for Evelyn's sudden disappearance and evidence that a violent crime had been committed against the popular high school student, everyone showed up at the Rasmussen home to help. A neighbor woman of the Hartleys summarized the feelings of those in the La Crosse community when she stated to a reporter, "You expect things like this to happen in New York or Chicago or St. Louis, but not La Crosse," while Mrs. Hartley, Evelyn's mom, sobbed in the kitchen. While a police officer was stationed at the scene immediately, the crime scene wasn't secured in the way we think of today. The paper reported that hundreds of curious sightseers trampled the area around the Rasmussen residence, and finally the police ordered everybody off and barricaded it off for 2 blocks around the house. So a lot of people had disturbed the grounds around the Rasmussen house and the crime scene on Sunday without realizing the consequences. The State Crime Laboratory Superintendent, Charles M. Wilson, arrived Sunday evening at about 5 p.m., and he took a cursory look around the crime scene. But the mobile lab needed to collect the physical evidence didn't arrive until 8 a.m. Monday, over 36 hours after the discovery of Evelyn's disappearance. George Brooks, famous bloodhound trainer and finder of lost people, was not in the best of health at this time, but he and local police used their bloodhounds to try and pick up a trail. In 4 separate attempts, the scent only lasted for 2 blocks. At Cooley Drive, it's believed that she was placed in a vehicle and driven away.
Police questioned neighbors, and one neighbor said she heard a scream around 7:15, but thought it was just neighborhood children playing. Another possible eyewitness said he saw a car in the neighborhood with 2 men and a girl in the back seat slumped over around 7:30. Alerts went out to all Wisconsin and Minnesota police departments to check on known sex offenders and question them in connection with Evelyn's disappearance. After news of the abduction started spreading on Sunday morning, estimates of over 1,000 people were gathered into search parties ranging from 30 to 60 people by Police Captain William Boma and sent to various areas in the city and county as far north as French Island and as far south as Goose Island. Many groups and organizations were mobilized, such as the National Guard, Naval and Army Reservists, and the Boy Scouts to search on the ground. Boats were deployed to scour the Mississippi River and its banks. The Civil Air Patrol took to the sky with planes donated by G. Highland Brewery and Dairyland Power, and the Air Force contributed helicopters to the search as well. The searchers included many of Evelyn's Central High School classmates, along with La Crosse State College students, faculty, and alumni in town for the homecoming events. Most of these groups were led by members of the Volunteer Auxiliary Police Force, which was mobilized in emergencies. These groups were instructed to be slow and deliberate in their search for evidence and inspect every object that looked suspicious or out of place. They lifted manhole covers, they checked ditches and culverts, they inspected sand piles and recently excavated areas with steel rods. Fresh graves were dug up to see if her body had been added. Residents were asked to check their garages and outbuildings. Farmers were asked to check their barns and sheds. And according to newspaper reports, no helpful clues were turned up on that first day. Searching continued the next several days, and a voluntary vehicle inspection program was announced by the police department in an attempt to eliminate city residents from suspicion. All local drivers were encouraged to take their cars to filling stations as soon as possible, where attendants would search trunks and rear seats for bloodstains and anything else suspicious. If a driver refused, or if anything suspicious was found in a car, a report was submitted to the police. 40,000 My Car Is OK stickers were printed and placed on inspected vehicles. Many people remember seeing those stickers on cars for years to come.
By Halloween, the FBI announced it would not enter the case. Because the police could not confirm that Evelyn or her body were taken across state lines, they refused to get involved in the search. In the end, most of the evidence thought to be linked to the case was found south of La Crosse and not in Minnesota. Many people wonder if the FBI had gotten involved in the case, how different the outcome may have been.
Within a month, a pair of Goodrich tennis shoes with markings that matched the footprints found in the house were discovered on Highway 14 near Coon Valley south of La Crosse. The blood on the shoes matched Hartley's blood type. A denim jacket was found near the same site where the shoes were discovered, also stained with blood that matched Hartley's type. A farmer had picked it up and alerted police. There was a noticeable worn mark on the back of the jacket, and the length of the jacket had been shortened, both of which indicated to authorities that the wearer was probably a steeplejack, which is not a very common occupation at the time. In the eyes of the police and the public at that time, these were definitively linked to the abductor. For months after these were discovered, Photos of the shoes and jacket were featured in the La Crosse Tribune, with police imploring the public to share any information they may have regarding the person who may have owned them.
Because Evelyn was a young woman, police suspicion rested on the theory that one or two males must have abducted her. After several months of no new leads, the county did hire a special crime investigator, A.M. Josephson, whose main job was working on this case. One of the things investigator Josephson did was to order mass lie detector exams to focus on the male student and faculty population from all three high schools, the state college and vocational school. The net was cast to include 1,700 males, but the use of the polygraph, although voluntary, was met with criticism. After UW psychologists gave an interview to the Associated Press, the program was shut down. In the end, only 300 males were actually tested, all from Central High School. Josephson also had the physical evidence of the tennis shoes and the denim jacket as part of a traveling display, looking for help from other communities south of La Crosse, hoping for a fresh lead. Josephson's contract was not renewed after 1957. Several promising suspects arose, and the local police were dedicating a lot of time to the case. By the time a year had passed, the county sheriff said his office had interrogated at least 400 people and questioned nearly 1,200 local persons. The local police detective estimated his team had questioned nearly 3,500 people. All confessions that came forward were disproved. Many of the so-called confessors were in jail or had other alibis at the time of Evelyn's disappearance. Jack Dufferin, a 20-year-old city man, was the most plausible. He was motivated by a reward of $500 in exchange of information about Evelyn. The Hartleys, while pretending to go along with the demand, assisted police in setting up a trap, and it worked. Dufferin knew nothing about the case and was convicted of extortion and imprisoned.
Ed Gein, the inspiration for Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, was born on La Crosse's north side. He made national headlines when he was arrested by authorities in his Plainfield home in 1957 after the disappearance of a local hardware store owner. Her decapitated body was found in Gein's home, alongside the remains of several other victims. 4 years after Hartley's disappearance, any possible lead was pounced on by La Crosse law enforcement, and given Gein's La Crosse connection, it wasn't a stretch to believe Hartley could have been one of his victims. Ed Gein, the inspiration for Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, was born on La Crosse's north side. He made national headlines when he was arrested by authorities in his Plainfield home in 1957 after the disappearance of a local hardware store owner. Her decapitated body was found in Gein's home, alongside the remains of several other victims. 4 years after Hartley's disappearance, any possible lead was pounced on by La Crosse law enforcement, and given Gein's La Crosse connection, it wasn't a stretch to believe Hartley could have been one of his victims. During the investigation of Gein and the disappearance of Hartley, law enforcement officials determined that Gein had actually been in La Crosse the night of Hartley's abduction, visiting his aunt just a few blocks away. Gein denied any involvement in the case and successfully passed 2 lie detector tests. Police were unable to prove that any of the many remains found on his rural property in Plainfield were from Hartley. In late November of 1957, authorities announced that he had been cleared of any connection to the case. Given all the connections made by law enforcement, the theory that Gein was involved in Hartley's disappearance still lingers in the community today.
In 1989, police got a lead that there may be a car buried in a very rural area in Pickwick, Minnesota. Investigators did follow up. They had some backhoes and digging, but did not find any evidence. In 2004, a man named Mel Williams came forward with a conversation he recorded at a bar on tape in 1969. Although his goal was to record a band which was performing, the conversation between two men at the bar was unintentionally recorded as well. On the tape, one of the men, Clyde Peterson, implicated himself, Jack Gauthier, and an unnamed third party in the disappearance, claiming that Evelyn was murdered after her kidnapping and buried south of Lafarge, Wisconsin. The unnamed party is now deceased. Gauthier committed suicide in 1967, and Peterson died of a heart attack in 1974. Although authorities promised to investigate the lead, no further developments were ever reported. It's always possible a confession or new evidence could emerge at some point.
Some of the theories that locals still maintain are that she ran away with a boyfriend. A peeping Tom had been reported several times in a nearby neighborhood. Hartley was a fill-in babysitter, so some say that she may not have been the intended target of the abduction. The Rasmussens' regular babysitter may have been the possible abduction target. Another theory that was initially floated by police is that it was a botched robbery, since most of the town would have been at the homecoming game. Attempted forced entry at other homes in the neighborhood would seem to support this. The culprit didn't expect to see anyone or the babysitter. Hartley may have fought back or protected the child. Something accidental happened and the culprit decided to take Hartley with to cover it up. There are many theories about where she may be buried, including under Jackson Street, which was being reconstructed at that time.
Everyone in the community was shocked and scared. No one went out alone and avoided staying out past dark for a long time after this case. The whole community was on edge and visibly shaken by the horrible crime. Movie theaters and restaurants remained empty for quite a while. Parents of small children were unable to get a babysitter for months. Mayor Henry Aarons made a plea in the newspaper, hoping that a way could be found to ensure the safety of those caring for children, as most parents refused to allow their daughters to babysit. The police chief took the opportunity to remind the community of the 10 p.m. curfew ordinance and strictly enforced it.
Ultimately, 70-plus years later, the Evelyn Hartley case remains unsolved, with no body found to even confirm a death. Many theories exist about what happened, but really, despite all the national and international news coverage, professional investigations, all the amateur detective work, what we're left with is a lot of questions and almost no answers.